We have this afternoon together to explore some territory, and what Jaakko and I have discussed is that we would like to spend some time getting at this question of what is mind. Nora Bateson talks about mind and has a kind of a definition for it. Jaakko's working with embodied mind. I am working with all kinds of mind. And I think it's worth our time to focus on that a little bit. Because not only are the concepts around this slippery, but they're very important, and they can give us a lot of information about what some of the limits are to the way that we are thinking. As an example, I'll just start the afternoon with this example, and we just see where it goes, okay? When I was at Oxford doing this thing yesterday on education, the person who spoke before me was a lovely young scientist who was working in neurocognition, who was studying the brain. And she started off with a kind of question about where in the brain the teenage risk behavior was located. I think we need to talk about that. There are a lot of assumptions and epistemological errors in that question, even though the question itself comes from a place of concern, a place of inquiry, and a place of educated process. But I think if we look at that with closer scrutiny, we will find that we're not sure what risk is. We're not sure what risk behavior is, and who's perceiving the risk behavior, and in what culture, and what are all of the fields of causation that are part of that risk, or is it somewhere that there's a button in the brain that is the risk behavior center. I understand why she's asking this question. And the fact is that we have a lot of adolescents that are at risk, that are in danger, that are in a place of suffering or causing suffering to others, that are doing everything from drugs to driving too fast, to flunking out of school, to being aggressive, to being depressed, to having anxiety, to not sleeping, to eating weird, okay? So I understand the concern there. But the question is somehow, I think, worth looking at in terms of what it tells us about the way in which we're framing the pathology. Or the question, where is the problem? So I want to start dealing with that question by going into art. I have been curious for some time as to why my family was so interested in art. Like I told you, when I was in college, I opted for an education in the arts instead of the sciences. I thought that I was dodging a bullet. I thought it would be less difficult. I thought that I was going to take the easy way. And I was absolutely wrong. My father's father was an art collector, and he was actually one of the people who originally got William Blake's work published. And so he was very dedicated to the arts and to poetry. And he, in fact, said that genius could only ever be seen in art and in nature. And that while science should always be inspired by it, it could never achieve genius. So, being that I was an art student, I thought, I got this. And it took me several years to really work out what he was talking about. What is it that art and nature have in common that science doesn't share? Well, one of the things that art and nature have in common is that they function on multiple levels simultaneously. Okay? If we look at the way that a vine climbs a tree, that story of that vine has to do with the shadows, it has to do with the particular seed, it has to do with where the puddles landed, it has to do with the way that the seasons unfolded in the year that it was seeding, it has to do with what animals live in the area, and it has to do with where the human beings walk their dogs and where they pee, and it has to do with the ants and the creatures, it has to do with the type of tree, it has to do with so many things. That wabi-sabi of the way that a vine climbs a tree is so many stories come together. An impossible number of stories. So what is possible in nature for a jungle to exist is for all of these relationships to take place over time, to evolve, to co-evolve, to compensate for each other, and to do so in something like a large improvisational conversation between organisms, between the history of organisms, between the evolution of where those organisms are moving to. I mean, if we keep talking about it, our heads are going to actually explode, I think. So how is that like art? When I was a little girl, I used to love to go to the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. And, you know, I don't know if any of you have been there. Anybody been to the Met in New York City? Do you remember the enormous painting of Mao Zedong by Andy Warhol? There's a huge Mao Zedong. And when I was a kid, that image of Mao Zedong said, in a very modernistic Andy Warholish kind of way, this is the image of arcane dictatorship. This is an obsolete form of dictatorship. And a couple of years ago, I went back to the Met and I saw that picture and I realized as I sat there looking at Mao Zedong's little Mona Lisa smile, and I thought, this is no longer what that painting says. Now we're looking at a world in which China is looming. And this image of Mao Zedong is not about being obsolete, it's about having a long plan. It's about a whole lot of other things that it didn't used to be about. But then again, I've changed. So what changed? The paint is still in the same place. The world changed, the context changed, I changed, and somehow these multiple stories are moving in a similar way that nature can move. Art is uncertain. If we look at a piece of art, when we look at a piece of art, or listening to a piece of music, or reading a story, or, and you can ask what is exactly not art in our lives. One of the things that we are doing is studying the relationships. What's happening with the color? What's happening with the light? Where is the subject placed in the frame? What does this painting or piece of music tell us about the time that it was created in? And how does that time relate to this time? You see, when we're looking at the role of art, very often we see it as a sort of a expression of creativity, which it is, but that's not all. And one of the reasons I feel that it's such a crime to be taking art out of the schools is because it is the place where we learn to use the muscle that is about perceiving relationships. So if we're listening to a piece of music, it's in the relationships between the notes and the rhythm and the silence and the instruments and the musicians and the audience and the context of that time that this piece of music actually makes sense. And the sense that it makes today is not the same sense that it makes tomorrow. And the sense that it makes to you is not the same sense that it makes to me. So we have a kind of room for knowing in multiple ways, for engaging in the way that nature engages. Somehow it's emotional, somehow it's intellectual, somehow it's got a language that it's inside of, and somehow there's no language at all. Art offers us a kind of paradoxical communication form that we cannot resolve. And what's interesting is that we're okay with that. But when it comes to studying another human being, or an ecosystem, or something we feel we should understand, those paradoxes become very uncomfortable for us, and we do all kinds of tricks to resolve them, to find solutions, to isolate, to singularize, to reduce. So the reason I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about art is because in art, we don't try to reduce. So it's a great place to start because we know we're going to have differing opinions. We know that the experience of our lives is going to read differently into a piece of music or a piece of art or a play than it's going to for the next person. And that's going to be a combination of all kinds of perceptions. Some of them are in our body. Some of them are visual or sense organ based. They're emotional, they're narrative. I'm going to switch back to nature now. There are these ants called leafcutter ants. Have you ever heard of leafcutter ants? Leafcutter ants are famous because they're bodybuilders. And they can carry something like 18 times their weight in these giant leaves that they carry. But that's not what's interesting about leafcutter ants. It's pretty cool, but just wait. Leafcutter ants are carrying those leaves not to make nests with or to eat. They're carrying those leaves to their little farms where they are farming fungus. And that's what they eat. So they're actually performing a kind of agricultural process. And like any good farmers, they have a problem with bacteria that can come and ruin their crops. Just like everybody else, right? But you know, as luck would have it, they have this little pit in the top of their head. And they make a kind of an enzyme in the pit of their head that they can dip their antenna into, and they can smear it on their fungus, and the bacteria goes away. Okay. Think of the incredible evolutionary conversation that is going on there between all these different species. the leaves, the ants, the fungus, the bacteria, how many millions of kinds of leaves, and how many millions of fungi, and how many millions of bacteria, and how many bazillions of types of enzymes are there in the world, that this conversation should come into a form. That's remarkable. How did that happen? How do we even make sense of that? And not only that, but I'm sure that I am only describing a very small fraction of those interrelationships, and that it's also dependent on the rest of the area and the weather and the other living things. So I've already done a reduction in that description. And when we're thinking about those ants and the way that they deal with their bacteria, what does it tell us about the way that we deal with bacteria? What can we learn from that? And I learned about these leafcutter ants at a research center in England. And they were talking about how they were not developing as many antibiotics as they used to develop. And I asked why, hoping for an altruistic answer, but sadly, disappointingly, they said because they don't sell. And the reason they're not selling is that people become sick from them, and bacteria become immune to them. I asked them, what's happening with that bacteria? Are the ants killing the bacteria? Because we know that if your game is to kill bacteria and you miss even one, that they become immune, right? So if they had killed them and they had been effective, there would actually be none, because they would have, over time, removed that bacteria from the program. So what are they doing? What is that relationship between that weird enzyme in their head and the bacteria, and what happens next? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it's worth a lot of speculation and imagination to play with that idea. Does the enzyme trigger some mating instinct and the bacteria go somewhere else? Does it transform it into some other kind of bacteria? Does it make it crave sugar and thereby leave the fungus? Does it, right? There's a million possibilities. But the point is that these organisms are in an ecology and in a very multiple themed conversation that's changing. It's hard to get our heads around it. So this is a little game about how we think and how we see. So here's my question to you. Can you see that they're Legos? Can you see that? Okay. So here's my question. What is the pattern? Yeah.
Cartoons.
Aha. We have a wise guy here. But before, did everyone hear him? No, good. Okay. Before we go into that, I want you to take a look at the way that you're looking right now. The kind of patterns you're trying to find. The way that you're seeing. So what we have here are, as the wise gentleman over here has pointed out, what we have are cartoons. They're families from cartoons. Right? Do you see them? There's the Simpsons, there's Marge with her big blue hair, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Do you see them? The Smurfs. Does everybody see it now? Asterix, Donald Duck and the boys, Bert and Ernie. reason I wanted to show you this image is that when we think we're going out there looking for patterns and that we're being objective and that our minds are free from the shackles of our culture, that we have to be very careful. One of the things I think this exercise illustrates is that if you go now and you say, what's the pattern? It's very difficult to be free of the cultural associations that we have established. I just would like for you to take a moment and see what you see here. What about the light? What about the colors? What about the framing? What about what's happening in all the different kinds of relationships in this image? And how do they relate to you? And to the whole bank of paintings and images that you have in your mind, in your history. Right? Because it's not isolated. This moment is part of a long and large conversation. I was in a bar in Northern Ireland, and the bouncer. It's really unfortunate, but I don't drink because I'm allergic to alcohol. It's terrible. But still, I went to the pub in Northern Ireland because you have to, you know. And the bouncer said, "What are you doing in Ireland, lass?" And I said, "I'm here to screen a film." And he said, "What's your film about?" And I said, well, and I said, "Well, you know, it's like about, I tried to do the hand thing, you know." And he looked at me sort of sideways and he said, "What does it matter to me, love?" And I thought, okay, this is my test. I have 30 seconds to describe why being able to see relationally matters. And it's not an easy thing to do. There are PhDs and books and entire theoretical models based on this, and I just had a bouncer and a pub and 30 seconds. But out of that 30 seconds, I think something really good came. Because what I learned was that the way that we describe things tells us everything about the way that we see them. And so I said to the guy, "Okay, you know about beer, right?" And he said, "Aye." And I said, "Okay, good, let's do beer then. What's beer? Is it the stuff in the glass? Is it the history of the agriculture? Is it the recipes? Is it the process of the brewing? Is it the culture of getting together with your mates on Friday night and listening to music? And is it the pub and the place of the pub and the society? Is it the distribution and the economy? Which part's the beer? Where's the beer?" And if I want to change beer, if I want to fix beer, if I want to solve beer, what should I do? Where's the solution? Where's the problem? Where's the beer? And you could say that about music. Where's the music? Is it in the notes? If you take all the notes down and put them, is that where the music is? No. Is it in the musicians? Well, sort of. Is it in the audience? And where's the painting? Where's the art? And where's the jungle? Is it in the insects? Is it in the trees? Is it in the animals? Which part's the jungle? So I think you get where I'm going. But the thing is that our ability to see in that way, in that relational way, is an ability to shift into looking not at the parts, but at the larger mind of what's happening. That part of this process is what's happening between us. It's not in me, and it's not in the painting. Where is it? And it is in me, and it is in the painting. So I can't say that it's not either. Now I've opened up a really blurry territory, and I'm going to invite Jaakko up, and we can dig further into this question of mind, and maybe start back with the question that came up at Oxford about finding the risk behavior in the brain.